Howdy everyone, Dr. Andy Woods here. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. This is Pastor's Point of View number 328. This is being released November the 15th, 2024. And as you can see from our previous slide, we've got an ambitious schedule for you today as we bring you this prophecy update. Let's jump right in and start with the temple. Notice, if you will, the book of Daniel, chapter 9 and verse 27. It's sort of an outline of the Great Tribulation period, and that passage, we've read it many times on this show, indicates that the Antichrist, midway through the tribulation period, will desecrate the rebuilt Jewish temple. And you'll notice this graphic that we frequently use that gives you an overview of the tribulation period. That desecration of the temple, according to Daniel's prophecy in Daniel 9 verse 27, is coming midway through the tribulation period, which means that some way, somehow, temple number 3 must be up and running and functioning midway through the tribulation period for the Antichrist to desecrate. You say, what do you mean by temple number 3? Well, notice this list here. It's got Israel's 4 temples on it. The first was the Solomonic temple, destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Then there was Zerubbabel's temple, built by the returnees from the exile, destroyed by the Romans. And ever since that point in time, when the Romans sacked Jerusalem, AD 70, the nation of Israel hasn't had a temple. And yet Bible prophecy demands that the nation of Israel must not only be restored to their land, but they must rebuild the temple so that the Antichrist can desecrate it midway through the tribulation period. You can't desecrate something that doesn't exist. So any type of, newspaper clipping or headline related to the restoration of temple number 3, which currently doesn't exist, shows us that we're rapidly approaching the events of the 7-year tribulation period. This is an analogy that a lot of prophecy teachers use. I love it, so I use it frequently, but it's related to God's end time stopwatch. When the discussion of the world focuses on Israel, you're dealing with the hour hand. When the discussion of the world focuses more specifically on Jerusalem, you're dealing with the minute hand. And when the discussion of the world gets more focused on something called the Temple Mount, now we're dealing with the second hand. And so with all of that being said, we got a couple of headlines to share with you related to this Jewish ambition to rebuild temple number 3. Notice this particular article from Israel 365 news.com, November 11th. The title of it is Midrash Hints That Trump Will Return Glory to Western World by Building Third Temple. Notice what the article says. It says, Rabbi Berger revealed some amazing aspects of Donald Trump's victory in the recent U.S. presidential election, most notably his potential role in building the Third Temple. As the spiritual descendant of Rome, the nation that destroyed the Second Temple, Trump has the potential to do a fixing the sin of Rome and returning the glory to Western society. Trump's election is a necessary element in the redemption and a sign that the Messiah's coming is imminent, Rabbi Berger said. That's why Donald Trump, his name in Gematria, which is Hebrew numerology, equals 424, which is the same as Ben David, the Messiah from the house of David, Rabbi Berger pointed out. This certainly does not mean that he will be the Messiah, but it indicates that he will play a role in preparing the way for the arrival of the Messiah. He clearly has this inclination. This connection was so evident in Trump's connection with Jerusalem that in 2018, the Sanhedrin minted a coin with the profile of Trump superimposed on the image of Persian King Cyrus, who facilitated the building of the Second Temple in Jerusalem that ended the Babylonian exile in 538 BC. So it's really, really interesting that from the Jewish perspective, at least from this rabbi's perspective, the Trump victory and Trump presidency, his second term, is not going to slow down the end times program. In fact, it may be the catalyst that accelerates it. One of the things we've heard a lot about from people, and I've articulated this view as well, that Trump's victory is going to slow down the New World Order. I think in certain ways it will, but there are other prophetic themes that I think are going to be put into hyperdrive, so to speak, with the Trump presidency. And so the movement towards this third temple and articles related to it from that standpoint are always very interesting. Now, hot off the press is this article from Times of Israel, and it concerns Pete Hegseth, who has recently been appointed as Trump's Secretary of Defense. And look at the title of this article. It is just absolutely fascinating. It says, Trump's nominee for Pentagon chief suggested a new temple could be built on the Temple Mount. And here's what the article says. It says, President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, suggested that a temple could be reestablished on the Temple Mount in a resurfaced speech he gave in 2018 at the Arutz Shiva conference in Jerusalem. Quoting here Hegseth, he says, there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible, Hegseth said. And listen to this statement. He says, I don't know how it would happen. You don't know how it would happen, but I know it could happen, he added. And so this is very, very interesting, very, very fascinating, because what he is articulating there is something we've said all along. The Bible just gives us the end game. It just tells us that a third temple has to be functioning midway through the tribulation period for the Antichrist to desecrate. We don't know how it's going to be rebuilt. We don't know exactly who the principal players are in terms of who will do the building. But we just know it has to be up and functioning and running midway through the tribulation period for the Antichrist to desecrate. And here's Donald Trump's new Secretary of Defense saying that very thing in a video that has recently surfaced back in 2018. So it looks to me like the Trump presidency may slow down certain end-time themes, but other themes will dramatically accelerate. Let's take you to the second category here. This is the world against Israel. And notice some familiar passages. Notice Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3. Notice what Zechariah predicts. Zechariah prophesies, it will come about in the last days that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples, and all who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against Jerusalem. And then when you go over to Zechariah 14, verse 2, Zechariah, writing 2,500 years ago, predicts the same thing when he says, For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half of the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. And so there's a very clear series of predictions in Scripture that the entire world, every nation, all peoples will be gathered against the nation of Israel. Now let me, in this particular segment, introduce to you two things that are happening now in real time that are, paving the way for the fulfillment of these prophecies. One of the things I'll draw your attention to is legal global structures are being erected, have been erected, or in the process of being built for a long time, and they are anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic at their core. Notice this particular prophecy again from Daniel, Daniel 7 verse 21 and then verse 25. Daniel says, I kept looking, and the horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. And then verse 25 says, he, that's the Antichrist, the little horn, will speak out against the Most High and will wear down the saints of the Highest One. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given to into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. So this is talking about the Antichrist coming to power through a pre-existing legal global framework or structure, basically the 10 King Confederation of the last days, which will encompass the whole earth. And the Antichrist will apparently get control of that anti-Semitic structure. 3 of the kings will resist him and have to be subdued. But the remaining 7 will submit to him. But some way, somehow, the Antichrist rises to power through this pre-existing global anti-Semitic structure. And he uses that structure to persecute God's people, who I think refers to the nation of Israel in Daniel 7, verse 21 and verse 25 in the end times drama. So one of the things you can look for as we get closer to the end of the age is a global structure that's anti-Semitic in its core. That is being developed globally as we speak. And so that's why this particular article from the Jerusalem Post, November 11th, 2024, I found so interesting. It says, did a former UNRWA, UNRWA. Now that's a United Nations relief organization which the Israelis don't want in their country anymore because it's influenced by Hamas. It says, did a former UNRWA teacher help organize the Amsterdam pogrom? And notice what this article says. It says the organized violent anti-Semitic rampage, which took place in Amsterdam Thursday night, shocked many in the European continent and beyond. Now, several days later, more and more information regarding the events and the organizers began to flow, with findings pointing to a PGNL, that's a Hamas-affiliated group, active in the Netherlands as a main organizer of the anti-Israel protests in the country. The article goes on and it says, following Rashid's arrest, the PGNL is led nowadays by an individual whose last name is Nejmeh, if I'm pronouncing that right, who appeared in the NCRI expose as an administrator at one of the PGNL's Instant Messaging Act groups. This particular individual is a Syrian-born activist who described himself on his Facebook profile as a former UNRWA teacher. He is a former UNRWA teacher, formerly connected to UNRWA, this relief organization, which really is more of a Hamas-affiliated organization connected to the United Nations, and who spoke at a pro-UNRWA rally on February. However, at some point in the past, a couple of days, this individual decided to delete his affiliation with UNRWA from his Facebook profile for unknown reasons. In any case, this individual himself has posted pro-Hamas content in his Facebook page, as well as including a picture of an Al-Qassam militant. So isn't it interesting that the individual that apparently was orchestrating this anti-Semitic activity that we've all read about taking place in Amsterdam was, in fact, connected with UNRWA, which is connected to the United Nations. The article goes on and it says, this is not a spontaneous or sporadic event, but a planned attack that include gathering intelligence, choosing convenient and easy targets, camouflaged observers in taxis, motorcycles, cars for ramming attacks, stun grenades, clubs, knives, and everything. The timing, location, and violent intent of the November 7th demonstration were all openly advertised on social media platforms hours and even days before. So this anti-Semitism at this event in Amsterdam was orchestrated by Hamas. And then there's a quote here in the article by someone named Marcus Sheff, CEO of Impact-SE, a research and policy institute that has extensively examined UNRWA's education program for years and was the sole think tank representative invited by both the United Nations Undersecretary General assigned to investigate UNRWA and by the U.S. Congress to testify and present evidence on UNRWA's alleged neutrality. And this is a quote from him, this researcher. He says the fact that this attempted pogrom in Amsterdam was organized by yet another self-described former UNRWA employee who was funded by European taxpayers is yet another proof, if one was needed after the attacks of October 7th, that there is something profoundly rotten in UNRWA's corporate structure. And what he's saying is the corporate structure of UNRWA is rotten. It is anti-Semitic from the core, to the point where a former teacher from UNRWA connected to the United Nations could orchestrate this series of anti-Semitic incidents, which we've all read about taking place in Amsterdam. And notice that the funding for this comes from European taxpayers. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later about a Eurocentric one world government that is being orchestrated. And so we know that this one world government that's on its way will arise out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. So it's interesting that European taxpayers' money is being funneled to fund this guy who organized these anti-Semitic attacks. And it's very, very interesting that he's also an UNRWA teacher. He's connected to the United Nations. Apparently, he doesn't want people to know that. That's why he deleted his, prior teaching with UNRWA recently from his Facebook page, not long before the attack. But all of this shows us that global structures themselves are being erected. Global structures themselves are being created that are anti-Semitic at their core in terms of their value system. This is the type of global infrastructure that the Antichrist ultimately will use to propel his way to world dominance. And we are seeing that anti-Semitic global structure being created even now. Now, let me give you a second way where the world is turning against Israel. The whole name of the game, as far as the international community is concerned, is the two-state solution. You'll notice this particular map, that lighter blue area called the West Bank by the world is what the world wants Israel to relinquish. And if they relinquish that to the Palestinians, then supposedly peace is going to break out in the region. Here's another map that we prefer, dealing with the same topography, geography, except there it's not called the West Bank. It's properly called, looking at that lighter blue area, brown area, Judea and Samaria. And in the southwest corner of the map, you'll see Gaza. And of course, Gaza is where the projectiles have been coming from against Israel, for a very long time, and it's where the terrorists of the events of October the 7th of last year came from. So remember that Israel had the Gaza Strip under their jurisdiction, and they relinquished it to the inhabitants of Gaza in exchange for the illusory promise of peace. And those in Gaza had one and only one election. They elected Hamas, and ever since that point in time, they've used it as a beachhead for terrorist activity into the nation of Israel. And if the two-state solution didn't work very well for Gaza, why would it ever work for Samaria and Judea? And yet this is what the world community is demanding. And you could see what would happen to Israel if she relinquished that area under the guise of the two-state solution to the Palestinians. It would take Israel's width and reduce it to less than 10 miles. And it would put Israel in a defenseless position. And this two-state solution would ultimately pave the way for the final solution, because it would make it all the easier for Israel's enemies to achieve their ultimate goal, which has never been coexistence with Israel. If you think what they want is coexistence with Israel, then that's a very naive perspective. They don't want coexistence with Israel. They ultimately want a one-state solution, meaning the eradication of Israel. And yet the world community keeps piling on Israel as we speak, making this demand. The whole world, it would seem, is jumping on board with this mindset. And I point this out to you to show you that we're literally living in a time period where we're seeing Zechariah's prophecies, the world turning against Israel, jumping off the pages of Scripture into prophetic fulfillment. So with that being said, notice this particular article from english.aram.org, November 11th. This is entitled "The Extraordinary Arab and Islamic Summit Reaffirms Support for Egypt's Mediating Efforts in Gaza." Notice what the article says. It says, "The Extraordinary and Islamic Summit reaffirmed Monday its unwavering support for the efforts by Egypt and Qatar in cooperation with the United States," sadly is a word that I just added, "to achieve an immediate, sustainable ceasefire in Gaza." In its statement, the summit placed full responsibility for the failure of these efforts on Israel, citing its government's reversal of agreements reached by negotiators. The article goes on and it says, furthermore, the statement demanded that Israel cease its aggressive policies and called for unification of Palestinian territories, including Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. So this conglomerate at this Arabic summit is demanding, in essence, the two-state solution. The article goes on and it says the summit also advocated a complete arms embargo against Israel, accusing it of committing genocide in Gaza. So there's your worldwide arms embargo against Israel. Globally, the nations of the earth depriving Israel of what she needs to root out Hamas in Gaza. The article goes on and it says the summit reiterated the centrality of the Palestinian cause, affirming its steadfast support for the Palestinian people in their struggle for legitimate and inalienable rights, including the right to freedom and an independent state based on the June 4th, 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. In other words, give up Judea and Samaria. The statement also upheld the right of the Palestinian refugees to return and receive compensation according to international law. The summit stressed Palestine's complete sovereignty over East Jerusalem, condemning any Israeli decisions or actions aimed at Judaizing the city and solidifying its colonial occupation. In other words, don't make this city look Jewish. Don't make Jerusalem look Jewish is what they're demanding. According to international law, the United Nations resolutions, such actions were labeled as illegal. So right on cue, global summit, Arabic summit, locking arms, joining hands, demanding that the nation of Israel acquiesce to this two-state solution. What's interesting is we here have a copy of this printed resolution that was created at this summit. The title of this is Resolution Issued by the Extraordinary Arab and Islamic Summit that just met in Saudi Arabia November 11th, 2024. And here they're calling for an independent sovereign state. Israel needs to go back to its pre-1967 borders, in other words, give up Judea and Samaria. They reject any Israeli decisions or measures aimed at Judaizing Jerusalem. They don't even like to use the name Jerusalem. But don't make Jerusalem look like a Jewish city, because the city doesn't belong to you. And consolidating its colonial occupation of the city. So that expression, occupation, is used throughout this document on purpose. Because in their minds, Israel does not own, first of all, the land of Israel. They don't own the city of Jerusalem. They don't own the Temple Mount. They don't know anything. So what are they doing there? Well, they're occupying. Well, the truth of the matter is you can't occupy something that you already own. And yet this particular document produced at this extraordinary Arab and Islamic summit does not acknowledge it. This statement that they came up with has about 38 parts to it, which obviously I don't have the ability to read on a broadcast like this, given our time limitations. But let me just read a few of these things. This is number 14. To welcome resolution, and it lists the resolution, issued by the General Assembly September 18th, 2024, which adopted the outcomes of the legal advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on the legality of Israeli occupation. Now, this is something that we covered. The International Court of Justice issued a fake legal ruling indicating that Israel has no legal right to that territory. Just like today we have fake news, well, that's a fake ruling and a fake law. As we've demonstrated in other programs, this is not based on the actual facts, but it's based on political opinion. Number 15, it says to call on states of the world, their legislative bodies, and all international institutions and organizations to abide by the resolutions of international legitimacy regarding the city of Al-Quds. Notice they don't even use the name Jerusalem. And its legal historical status as an integral part of the Palestinian Authority or territory occupied since 1967. Number 19, they say, we want to call on all countries to ban the export or transfer of weapons and ammunitions to Israel. So they're calling for a global boycott against Israeli having the ammunitions that they need to defend themselves. Number 21 on the list, they call for a two-state solution. They call it occupied territory where the Israelis now reside in the Middle East. And they call their presence there colonial, meaning they took that territory illegitimately. And then when you get to number 22 on the list, they get into the economics realm, and they're calling for a worldwide boycott. Boycotting products of Israeli settlements on the occupied territories. And any company that would do business with Israel in Judea and Samaria, they say should be listed on what is called the lists of shame. You know, held out to public attack and public ridicule in an attempt to get accomplish what is called BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. On number 23 on their list, again, they call Israel occupied territory. They call for a Palestinian state. They call for a two-state solution. Number 24, they call Israel to return to their pre-June 4th, or pre-June 5th, I should say, 1967 line. Number 25, they call for the implementation of a two-state solution. On number 29 on the list, look at this. They're upset that Israel has banned UNRWA from its territory and its country. I mean, wouldn't you ban something from your territory or your land that masquerades as a relief organization that really has a Hamas tilt? They're upset about that. A lot of the same language: state of Palestine, Israeli occupation, calling Jerusalem Al-Quds, give up the West Bank is re-articulated there in number 30 on their list. They're calling for a president of Palestine, sovereignty over the state of Palestine. They stress the need in number 33 to end Israeli occupation. They're upset that Israel has annexed the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is that up north, that mountainous buffer zone between Israel and Syria, which is a very critical part of the nation up north, necessary to defend themselves from incoming attack. The big three, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, even as I speak, are perched there in Syria. The government of Syria is kind of what we would call a puppet government. And Israel has this mountainous region to protect themselves from such an attack. And the Israelis want to annex that area, the Golan Heights, into their own land for purposes of self-defense. This particular Arab Islamic summit is against that. Number 35, they call Israel an occupier. And number 37, the last one I'll refer to, they say Israel needs to cooperate with the OIC. What's the OIC? It's the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It's that giant group of Islamic nations that wield tremendous power in the United Nations. So all of this shows, I think, something very, very significant, that the world is turning against Israel exactly as the prophet Zechariah predicted 2,500 years ago. Let's switch gears and let's move into Gog-Magog, our third bullet point. I'm going to make a few points concerning Persia or Iran, as Ezekiel 38 and 39 predicts, attacking Israel in the last days. If you want some documentation as to why Persia equals Iran, I don't have time to go into that here, but you can get my little book, The Middle East Meltdown, to get documentation as to why we believe Persia or Iran is Iran and one of the principal invaders into the land of Israel in the last days. So notice this particular map that we refer to frequently. We've got Persia or Iran circled, and they will be one of the attackers that will attack the nation of Israel in the end times. While we all love the Persian people, it's very important to understand that the regime that rules the Persian people, the government of Iran, is a corrupt, evil, wicked government. I would refer to it as a regime. And what's interesting is the election of Donald Trump by the American people November 5th is not going to slow down Iran's progress. In fact, it's going to accelerate it. In fact, some of the leaders of Iran have made, since Trump was elected, a number of just outrageous statements against Trump himself, revealing Persia or Iran's true nature. Notice this particular article from MEMRI. MEMRI stands for the Middle East Media Research Institute, it's really a invaluable source, because what it does is it takes the statements of Islamic leaders and just translates them into English. So the days where they could say one thing in English and deceive the West and another thing in Arabic revealing their true agenda, those days are gone thanks to memory. And memory has this particular article here. The title of it is Reactions in Iran to Trump's Election Victory. Here's some of the statements that Iranian leaders have made recently. This is dated November the 8th, 2024. The return of the murderer, they say, concerning Trump. The sword of vengeance hovers above Trump's head. They call America the great Satan. They call Iran and the resistance axis are ready. So the article says this: officially, Tehran, Iran, maintains that as far as it is concerned, there is no difference whether the U.S. has a Democrat or a Republican president, and that no matter what, America is the great Satan. However, several regime officials have expressed their views on Trump's re-election and underlined his responsibility for the U.S.'s January 2020 killing of Soleimani, one of their leaders, and for the harsh sanctions policy against Iran. The following are some reactions by senior regime officials and regime-affiliated outlets to Donald Trump's election as the President of the United States. So I'll just read to you one of these. But one leader highlighted Trump's election and featured him in an image, handcuffed and in a prison uniform. I think that's the image on the Memory article. Another one talks about how the sword of vengeance hangs over Trump's head. And on and on and on we can go with these statements that are brought out, very effectively in this Memory article. But all of this shows that the Trump presidency has not slowed down the Gog-Magog scenario. In fact, it has made Iran more hostile to the West and our ally, the nation of Israel. And their own officials, in their own language, in their own state-controlled media, are acknowledging that. So thank you to Memory for bringing this to our attention. The Gog-Magog scenario is tightening, it's solidifying, it's crystallizing, and Persia or Iran, as a bellicose, aggressive invader, hater of the West, invader of Israel in the last days, which is what Scripture predicts, is on the fast track. That scenario is coming together very, very aggressively, and the Trump's ascendancy to the White House doesn't seem to be slowing that down whatsoever. With all that being said, let's go now to our fourth major bullet point, and this has to do with global tyranny. Global tyranny. Notice, if you will, the book of Daniel, chapter 7 and verse 23, as it describes the form of global one world government that will exist in the end times just before Jesus returns in his second advent. Daniel predicted, thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. This is speaking of global one world tyranny in the last days. Now, as you look at this particular statue here, it's what both Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar saw in Daniel 2. This is the 10 horns of Daniel 7, but in Daniel 2, they're portrayed as 10 toes. These 10 toes are 10 kings or 10 regions, which will cover the whole earth. This global government, as we said earlier, will be anti-Semitic at its core. And that will be the legal and global structure that the Antichrist will use to propel his way to world domination. You'll notice that the feet are connected to the legs. The legs of iron, when you interpret this correctly, would represent ancient Rome. And so the feet, future global governance, connected to the legs, indicates that this global government is going to arise out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. In other words, it's going to be Eurocentric. So one of the things to look for in the end times scenario is a Eurocentric, tyrannical global government starting to form. So with those thoughts in mind, I want to draw your attention to this particular article put out by Breitbart. November 10th, 2024, it says German Vice Chancellor Habeck demands more censorship of Elon Musk's X after Trump victory. It says German Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck said that Europe must enact strict regulations on Elon Musk's X platform to fight so-called disinformation. Habeck, the likely candidate for chancellor for the leftist Green Party in the upcoming elections, laid out his vision for Germany. Remember, the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome, for Germany and Europe in a speech on Saturday, including more internet censorship in the wake of Donald Trump's victory. The article goes on and it says, therefore, he argued strict European Union regulations must be applied to platforms such as TikTok and X. And the article goes on and it quotes him, and it quotes a number of other Eurocentric leaders demanding the same thing. And what you have to understand about these people is they don't have any concept of free speech. They don't want the people of the world to receive any kind of information whatsoever that would contradict their preordained narrative. This is how tyrants seize control of civilizations and ultimately the world. Free speech is a number one enemy of theirs. So obviously someone like Elon Musk, who took Twitter, bought it and turned it into X and turned it into a free speech platform, is enemy number one. And so what they want to do is they want to criminalize X. They want to criminalize any social media free speech platform. And they have some legal tools at their disposal to do that. And that's what they're doing. And they're actually being more aggressive with it rather than less aggressive with it post the Donald Trump electoral victory. Notice this particular article from Rahm Emanuel. This is a classic. We'll never forget. He said this. As Obama's chief of staff back in 2009, he says, you never let a crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that is it's an opportunity to do things you could not do before. In other words, government loves a crisis. In fact, if government doesn't have a crisis, government will create a crisis, because they'll use the crisis as an excuse for expanding the reach of government, making it more totalitarian, emergency police powers, all in the name of protecting its citizenry from the alleged crisis. It's like somebody that, I've heard this example used, they start a fire on your back porch, and then they show up on your front porch and they sell you a fire extinguisher. And they're so grateful that you're there selling you the fire extinguisher because you're there to solve the crisis for them, when in actuality they created the crisis. It's called management by crisis. And so with all of that being said, that is how the New World Order, this Eurocentric New World Order, is developing. With all of that being said, notice this particular article from slaynews.com, November 9th, 2024. It says, Dutch government official admits COVID pandemic was a military operation. And what she is saying here is this wasn't a health issue. everything that we went through with COVID and the reactions to COVID and the legal clampdowns. This was not a health issue. This was a military operation from its beginning. The article says a top Dutch government official has admitted that COVID was a military operation and revealed that her nation was taking orders from NATO during the pandemic. Dutch Health Minister Fleur Agema, if I'm pronouncing that right, has revealed that the military operation was led by NATO and the Netherlands National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism, otherwise known as the NCTV. They were the true entities, the true military entities that were pushing all of the reactions that we saw in 2020, the overreactions, I would say, to the pandemic. The article goes on and it says, prominent Dutch doctor Els van Veen says she finally understands what happened to her and other critical doctors during the coronavirus crisis. Quote, it was a military operation. The Minister of Health obeys NATO and NCTV, Dr. Van Veen said in a post on X. And this article goes on and it quotes a number of people that are sort of agreeing with what Agema said recently in her speech. Someone named Cees van Dien Bos is quoted. William Engel is quoted. And here's an interesting line. It says, many believe this explains why Sweden, which only joined NATO this year, was the only country in Europe to adopt a more lenient policy during the pandemic. The article goes on and it quotes Robert F. Kennedy, basically articulating the same thing. And here's how the article concludes. COVID policy is a child of the NCTV and NATO, Agema asserted. So when you look at the clampdowns that violated so many people's rights during the whole shutdown, lockdown, you have to understand this as a military operation dictated from NATO, and it had very little or less to do with dictates from the World Health Organization. Of course, the two are working in tandem with each other, but what is being admitted here is at the end of the day, this was an actual military operation. So think of that in terms of the New World Order. You know, the capacity of these sort of transnational bureaucrats to put the society, you know, as a whole under lockdown, under military order. Think of how that sets the stage for Daniel chapter 7, verse 23, which anticipates a global tyranny in the last days. Here is another article that is moving the same direction, this particular one from brownstone.org, and it says the CDC planned quarantine camps nationwide. This is dated November the 7th, 2024. Notice what the article says. It says, no matter how bad you think COVID policies were, they were intended to be worse. Consider the vaccine passports alone. 6 cities were locked down to include only the vaccinated in public indoor places. They were New York City, Boston, Chicago, New Orleans, Washington, D.C., and Seattle. The plan was to enforce this with a vaccine passport. Once the news leaked, the planners lost public support and the scheme collapsed. It was undoubtedly planned to be permanent and nationwide, if not worldwide. So this documentation indicates that the lockdowns that we saw here in the United States of America could have been far worse, and in fact were planned to be far worse. They were supposed to be not just aimed at 6 cities, nationwide, if not worldwide. Now, is this not setting the stage for the one world tyranny predicted by the prophet Daniel in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 23, which we read about a little bit earlier? So this is a fascinating article that details the level of totalitarianism that they had originally planned for the American citizenry. So this kind of thing is happening in Europe. This kind of thing is happening in the United States of America. And speaking of the United States of America, let's go to this article here. This one dated November the 8th, 2024 from Daily Wire. It says, exclusive, FEMA official ordered relief workers to skip houses with Trump signs. Now, as you know, prior to the election, America was hit by some severe storms. One did a lot of damage in North Carolina. I think that was Hurricane Helene, if I remember correctly. Another one did a lot of damage in Florida. That was Hurricane Milton, if I remember correctly. FEMA is the American government agency which is supposed to come in and help people and give them relief that have been victimized by hurricanes of this nature. Well, now what's coming to the surface is texts and emails and memos and conversations indicating from the top down that when FEMA goes in to do its work, if there happens to be a Trump sign out front of the person's porch or door or yard or whatever, they are not to receive relief. Now, that is a blatant violation of the 14th Amendment, in my opinion, because the 14th Amendment has an equal protection clause in it, which says the government cannot treat similarly situated people differently on the basis of race, nationality, ethnicity, gender, and also political affiliation, political beliefs, religious beliefs, political alignment. And the fact that FEMA, the evidence seems to indicate, was treating people differently on the basis of politics. I mean, you get help if you don't have a Trump sign in your yard. You don't get help if you have a Trump sign in your yard. Is a basic violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This particular article says from the Daily Wire, November the 8th, a federal disaster relief official ordered workers to bypass the homes of Donald Trump supporters as they surveyed damage caused by Hurricane Milton in Florida, according to internal correspondence obtained by the Daily Wire and confirmed by multiple federal employees. It's a lengthy article, documenting this horror show. The article is so long, obviously we don't have time to read it all or get to all of it. But we're now living in, if this is not corrected, we're living in a type of society or a type of situation where government is running amok. Government is acting like a totalitarian bully, trying to achieve political results and actually capitalizing on the lives of victims to get its political will across and to get people to submit to its political will. All of these stories that I'm bringing to your attention show us that the global government of a totalitarian nature in the last days is forming. Also from the Daily Wire, we have this particular article here. It says exclusive official ordered relief workers to skip houses with Trump signs. The subtitle is Whistleblower. It's almost unbelievable to think that somebody in the federal government would think that's okay. And as you kind of look there at the article, bottom right-hand corner, you see the various posts, texts, tweets, electronic communications indicating that FEMA was actually doing this. And so here is another article, FEMA chief to testify before lawmakers on instructions to skip Trump supporters' homes. So fortunately, the legislative branch of government is going to look into this, which they should. But all of these things to me are a sign of the times. It shows us that global government, tyrannical government, in the United States, in Europe, eventually to be rolled out worldwide, is in the works. Well, let me conclude with some good news. There's actually some good news that took place relative to the election of November the 5th. There have been actually some real victories for liberty. As you all know, Donald Trump won the election. He beat Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for the presidency. Donald Trump won a very lopsided victory of somewhere around 312 electoral votes. Now, here's a map that was put out by Newsmax, and I find this to be very interesting because it shows you all of the blue states that Kamala Harris won. And what do all of those states, with I think just one little tiny exception on the East Coast, other than that one little state on the East Coast, what do all of those blue states have in common? Well, they don't require a voter ID. All the red states that Trump did win require, most of which, I would think, a voter ID. Well, this explains why the Democrats have been pushing for no voter ID and why they have been pushing as aggressively as they have for illegal immigration. And so their agenda was political, to elect Kamala Harris, and all of the states that acquiesced and said we're not going to have a voter ID. Interestingly enough, those were all of the states and the only states that Kamala Harris carried according to this very, very interesting Newsmax map. But despite all of that, something really good happened. The red states, in this case, won. Donald Trump is now the president-elect. In our last show, I feel that that favorable electoral outcome against all odds is largely due to the work of the restrainer, the Holy Spirit holding back the man of lawlessness principally through his own church. You remember 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. It says, you know what restrains him now, so that in his time he will be revealed, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains him will do so until he is taken out of the way. So yes, the man of lawlessness is coming, but he can't come to power as long as the restrainer is present. I believe the restrainer was present, doing work on November the 5th, and that's why I actually could bring an electoral win to your attention as part of a prophecy update. The Holy Spirit was at work through God's people as they showed up to vote to hold back the man of lawlessness and the spirit of lawlessness, which is already at work. And it has been very heartening as we kind of survey some of this good news, that as Trump has been filling his cabinet, we're hearing names like Pete Hegseth, who I mentioned at the top of the show. We're hearing names like Dan Bongino, Matt Gaetz, a number of others. I'm trying to think of a few others, but I'm drawing a blank. But these are all, Tulsi Gabbard would be one. Elise Stefanik would be another. Lee Zeldin would be another. So these are all kind of household conservative names. We're hearing names like Marco Rubio. Again, these are not perfect people like Trump, but they come to these positions with a basic nationalistic, non-globalist, conservative worldview. And it's encouraging that we're hearing names like that as the Trump cabinet is being filled. Now, this is very different than what we typically got from, let's say, George Bush, the first Bush presidency, one term. The second Bush presidency, his son, 2 terms. You remember the election of Jimmy Carter, 1979. I mean, as those cabinet positions and those administrations were being filled, we weren't hearing names like these conservatives that we're hearing about here. We were hearing names coming from the Council on Foreign Relations. We were hearing names coming from the Trilateralist Commission. In fact, Patrick Wood, who I just spoke with at a conference, the Worldview Weekend Conference at Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri, has a fascinating book entitled Trilateralists over Washington, how the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations have had a disproportionate representation in almost every presidential administration going back to the days of Jimmy Carter. In fact, Barry Goldwater, in one of his books, pointed this out. And it's very heartening as the Trump cabinet is being filled. You're not hearing names from the Trilateral Commission or the Council on Foreign Relations. In case you don't know, the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations are very globalist in their outlook. But the Trump cabinet looks very nationalistic in its outlook. And so there are a lot of things that are good that are going on, and I attribute that largely to the work of the restrainer. In fact, notice this particular article here. This one comes from Politico.com, and it says, "We know what's coming. Federal bureaucrats wrestle with flight or fight response to Trump election." The article says many civil servants and political appointees are bracing for a wave of departures from key federal agencies in the coming months amid fear that the next president will gut their budgets, reverse their policy agendas, and target them individually if they do not show sufficient loyalty. Thousands of federal bureaucrats have lived through one Donald Trump administration. Many are not so sure that they can survive a second. And the article goes on and it records the words of a lot of bureaucrats who didn't want their names used, that they're in fear of losing their jobs. Well, when the government shrinks, the citizen enlarges. When the government enlarges, the citizen shrinks. So this fear on the part of these bureaucrats is actually a very good thing for our country and our society as a whole. It has been said that the definition of tyranny is the people are afraid of the government. The definition of liberty is the opposite. The government is afraid of the people. And I think with what happened November 5th, slowly but surely the pendulum is swinging. Now how far it's going to swing, I don't know. But it's swinging in the direction of liberty. As the whole concept of global government is growing throughout the world, in Europe, here God, through the work of the restrainer, in his providence and society, has opted to give the United States of America a bit of a reprieve. And for that we can be thankful, and we should use it wisely. On this issue of good news in the area of liberty, let me bring one more article to your attention before we conclude. This comes from the Texas Scorecard, November the 8th, 2024, written by Aaron Anderson. It says this: monumental win. Republicans flip 23 Texas appeals court seats. GOP judicial candidates won 25 of the 26 contested Court of Appeals races on the November 5th ballot. The article says Republicans flipped 23 Democrat seats in 5 appellate courts across Texas, winning 25 of 26 contested courts of appeal races on Tuesday's ballot. The shift was one of the most consequential and unexpected results of the November 5th election. The article concludes by saying Republicans also swept statewide judicial races, winning all 3 Texas Supreme Court seats up for election and all 3 Court of Appeal criminal appeals seats. And let me tell you why this is so significant. These judges will be around long after Donald Trump is gone. Long after the Texas governor is gone, these judges will be around. That's why filling these seats with people that are actual constitutionalists is a big deal. And so what happened on Tuesday took the red state of Texas and made it even redder. Now, everybody's been saying the opposite's going to happen. Texas is becoming purple and is transitioning into blue. Well, obviously what happened November 5th doesn't indicate that, at least at the present time, as now we're going to see judges moving in more of a conservative direction, doing their thing long after Donald Trump is gone. I know a little something about the power of judges. My own father, who went to be with the Lord Memorial Day weekend, was an attorney, and then because George Gog-Magog beat Tom Bradley in the California gubernatorial race in 1980 by less than 1%. My father was appointed to the Superior Court, and later Gog-Magog elevated him to the Court of Appeals, where he completed his career there, a Court of Appeals justice in the state of California. And he was making wonderful rulings long after George Gog-Magog, who appointed him, had retired and was no longer politically viable. I mean, he made some great rulings concerning, at the time, atheists who wanted to join the Boy Scouts and force their way in by law. My father authored an opinion saying no, and a number of other very strong, very sound conservative rulings coming from him. That's the potency of these appointments, and I realize that in Texas, judges rise to their position differently than they do in California. California, it's largely through appointment. In Texas, it's largely through being elected. But anyway, you slice it, you now have this fresh slate of judges that are coming in that are red, Republican, constitutionalists, conservatives, and that's actually good news for the state of Texas. So in the midst of a lot of the bad news that I've been giving you, from a human perspective, there's some very good news. So with that being said, sort of the review, if you will, of our prophecy update is we brought you some information about the temple. We've brought you some information about the world coming against Israel. We've updated you a little bit on the Gog-Magog alignment concerning Iran's reaction to Trump's election. I've showed you some clear, wicked progress into global tyranny, but at the same time, there's a restrainer. And Satan is only allowed to take things so far as the restrainer is in the earth, offering some good news in the midst of this bad news from the human perspective. Let me conclude with the ultimate good news, which is found in the book of Titus, chapter 2, verse 13. It says, looking for the blessed hope in the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Christ Jesus. Things are not falling apart. Things are falling into place. Yes, God is restraining the hand of evil, but at the same time, this world is the devil's world, preparing the way for the Great Tribulation period. And before the Great Tribulation period manifests itself, we have a promise in God's Word that He, Jesus Christ, is coming to take His own out of the earth through an event called the rapture of the church before the Great Tribulation period is manifested. We're told we are not destined for wrath. The 7-year tribulation period is a time period where God pours forth His wrath. And so as we see the shadows of the 7-year tribulation period approaching, we can live with the promise that any day, any moment, Jesus can return and rapture His own to heaven. I just hope and pray that you're tied into that promise because you know Jesus personally. And if you don't know Him personally, you can fix that problem right now by trusting which is another word of saying believing in the finished work of Jesus Christ that he accomplished for us 2,000 years ago through his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. His final words on the cross were, "It is finished." Rather than us trying to save ourselves, he's done the work in our place, and all he asks us to do is to believe or trust in what he has done. And you can resolve that issue now simply by placing your trust for your eternity, the safekeeping of your soul, the forgiveness of your sins exclusively into the God-man, Jesus Christ. A couple of words in closing by way of infomercials. I want to direct your attention to our free app in the App Store. Go to Andy Woods Ministries to get all of our recent and archived content. Pastor's Point of View is also available in podcast format. Go to wherever it is you get your podcasts, type in Andy Woods Ministries, and enjoy Pastor's Point of View in podcast format. I want to direct your attention to our website, andywoodsministries.org, where you can get all of our current and archived content. There's also a conspicuous way on the homepage. You can see from the circle an arrow, the red arrow going down and that yellow circle. There's a conspicuous way on the homepage to sign up for our newsletter, which basically consists of the show notes that we read from every week on Pastor's Point of View. Those will show up in your inbox if you sign up. So every time we post a new Pastor's Point of View show, these notes will show up in your inbox, all free of charge, of course. I am the president of a seminary, Chafer Theological Seminary. There's the website at the top there, chafer.edu, if you're interested in seminary training. I would encourage you to check out Chafer Theological Seminary. Also check out our journal, Pneumaticos. We had a recent issue come out, and we're about ready to have our next issue to get some cutting-edge academic articles on important subjects. And I want to draw your attention to the pre-trib study group that's going to be meeting in Dallas, Texas, December 9th through 11th. Some really cutting-edge academic type presentations, papers related to eschatology, which is what we're focused on here, largely in Pastor's Point of View, God's End Time program. A lot of wonderful presentations taking place this year. I'm doing a presentation on the departure in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Other presentations will be given, so I would encourage you to check that out. And finally, last but not least, I want to make you aware of our Sugarland Bible Church approaching ProfCon. This is a prophecy conference entitled Faith for Final Days. And that's going to be February 21st and 22nd. 21st is a banquet at nearby Sugar Creek Country Club Friday evening. The conference will go all day Saturday and will conclude with a Q&A session. And then we would invite you to stick around for our services at Sugarland Bible Church, as our speakers are going to be presenting during our normal services here at Sugarland Bible Church on Sunday the 23rd. If you want to be involved in this conference, and we'd love for you to come, we need you to register on the Sugarland Bible Church homepage. Registration is filling up fast, and so the sooner you can register, the better. We're going to be having special music at the conference by Claude and Rebecca Chu, and we're going to be having special music during the conference itself. Claude and Rebecca Chu doing special music at the banquet. The special music at the conference is going to be performed by one of our in-house music groups called Olam Worship. Speakers include Olivier Melnick, Dr. Randall Price, Bill Federer, and myself. This is going to be a cutting-edge conference that you don't want to miss. I want to encourage you to come out for that. Spend a weekend here at Sugarland and enjoy that conference. Banquet Friday night, all-day conference here at Sugarland Bible Church. Rolls over nicely into our Sunday morning services on the 23rd. And so come and join us for that conference. That's all I have for today in this particular pastor's point of view. Thank you for sharing this ministry. Thank you for caring about this ministry. Thank you for praying for this ministry. Thank you for supporting this ministry and getting behind it. And we will see you next time, Lord willing, on Pastor's Point of View. God bless you.